This is the second session after lunch, so I hope you guys all took your naps already and are excited to learn about the FileMaker server admin APIs. I'm Melody Shu, and I'm the WebDirect Engineering Manager at FileMaker. My team has recently been helping out development for the new admin console and the admin APIs. So this is my first DevCon that I'm presenting at, and this is my third and the fourth DevCon that I've attended. But I've been at FileMaker since the days of Instant Web Publishing and PHP Site Assistant. I'm not sure if all of you know what those are. Anyways, enough about me. You're here to learn about admin APIs. So I'm going to go over the FileMaker server management in 17, give an overview of admin APIs, talk about the structure, the execution, and give some demos. So how many of you have already installed the FileMaker server 17? Okay, some good number of you. How many of you have tried out the admin APIs? Some number of you. Well, I hope all of you get something out of this session. So server management has three main components. So you got the admin console that gives you the simple interactive UI. You have the command line with the advanced set of configurations. And you also have the admin APIs currently in trial with advanced and critical configurations also. So what are admin APIs? So this is a tool for you to manage your server using HTTP requests. And it's not supposed to replace admin console or the command line, but more of a complement. So we're giving you another thing in your toolbox to be able to manage your server better. So you've noticed that we're saying that this admin API is trial. What does that mean? Basically, it is subject to change. The syntax is going to change, so don't be dependent on that. And also, we're rolling it out in 17 because we want your feedback. And our plan is to make enhancements and improvements to it. So what can the admin API do? It can help you manage your database files, your server settings, schedules, and even disconnect your clients for you. The admin API uses the HTTPS protocol, so that means you need to have a valid custom certificate installed on your server. And this is for security reasons, and I hope you guys are already doing that today for your servers. And it is session-based, and you're limited to 5, but that should be enough for you. And how do these sessions work? So the idea is that you would call an API to authenticate using your server root admin account username and password, get back a session token, and using that, you can then call other admin APIs. And when you're done, you're going to invalidate this token. But this session token has a 15-minute idle timeout, so if you don't do anything with it for 15 minutes, it's going to be invalid anyways. So keep in mind that, not all the admin APIs are run synchronously. Some of them are asynchronous. And the reason for that is that some of the operations are going to take some time. So think about your open database operation. So if you want to open all your databases, that's going to take time. If you're doing verification on your databases, that's going to take some time. And so this is using HTTP request response. You don't want to, there's a timeout. You can't just be waiting all day for that response. So some of these calls are asynchronous. What does that mean? So asynchronous means that I send an open database admin API request to the server. The server, if the request is all fine and server understands, then it's gonna return right back, and most likely you're gonna get a success. And you're gonna be like, oh, my opening of the database was successful, but that just means server acknowledged this request. So how do you know when your databases are all opened if what you're getting back is successful, but that doesn't mean that it finished? Unfortunately, you're going to have to keep polling the server for the database status. So some of you might have heard about data APIs. Are they the same as admin APIs? No, they are not. They're using the same technology. It's both using Node.js process in the back end. It's also using a RESTful base, uses HTTPS, but admin APIs is for server administration. It uses your root admin account. Data APIs is for your database solution. It uses the database solution account and also performs database solution operations. The processes that are running in your server are two different node processes. Also, the request and response formats and the error handling are not the same between the admin APIs and the data APIs. So now you're asking, there's this cloud admin APIs, there's this server admin APIs, are they the same? So definitely they're more similar, and they're both for the same purpose. They're both to administer your server. They're both using root admin account. They're both RESTful based, and a lot of the requests and the formats are the same. We even share some parts of the validation between the two. But there are slight differences, and I want to point that out that if you're reading the FileMaker Cloud Admin API Guide, you want to use it as a reference, but there are slight differences that you want to pay attention to. And also, cloud is more restrictive. So it's a subset of the APIs that the server provides. And even schedules APIs. Cloud only supports two types of script schedules. The FileMaker script schedule and the message script schedule. So how does all these different technologies fit into your FileMaker server? So I've created this diagram to kind of illustrate all the things that are going on your server. So here's your database server, and that's the guy that knows everything. It knows what your database solution looks like, all the records. It is the one also performing a lot of operations to update your database. So you can see that the Pro and Go clients connect directly to it, but there's WebDirect clients, DAPI clients, custom web publishing clients. All these different clients are hitting the server. So the admin console clients and the admin API clients go through your web server and then hit the same admin server process. And that's a Node.js process. And that admin server process is basically handling your request, processing your request, and then sending that request to the database server. And then the database server is actually the one that's performing the operation and also returning you back the information. So notice that, admin console and admin API both basically hit the same process. What that means is if anything you do in an admin API is going to impact that process, it's going to impact your admin console also, clients also, and vice versa. So the reason I wanted to show this diagram is also to illustrate that you got to be cognizant when you use the admin console and the admin API, because you want to leave your server enough resources to process your actual clients that want to get database and perform operations on a database, and less so on the administrator and monitoring. So now that we know what admin APIs are, what's exactly the structure of it? So as I said, it's using HTTP. So it creates this HTTP request with some main components. So there's more components than these, but these are the most important ones for admin APIs. And then this request gets sent to the server, and then the server is going to process it and return back a HTTP response. And in this response, you're going to get a few main components. And of course, there's more than what I listed up here. So the request URL is made up of the scheme, the host, the path. And this path is what we call the URI endpoint. And this is very important. People are going to keep talking about the URI endpoint is this and that. This is basically what's telling the server what you're acting on. And so now that we know what the resource is, we want to know what do you want to do with this resource. And that's the action. So what you're going to be doing is CRUD operations. And these operations map to these HTTP request methods: get, post, put, patch, delete. So get basically is for you to fetch your information. It shouldn't be modifying anything. There should be no side effects to get. Post is for creating something. And so example is creating a session, creating schedules. Put and patch is for you to update stuff. So the difference between put and patch is for put, it's basically saying I want to replace everything on my server with what I gave you in my request. Patch is saying that I only want to modify a few parameters. So part of the request is the data that you want to send to the server. And for admin APIs, it's going to be in a JSON format. That means you're going to have curly braces surrounding a bunch of key value pairs. So in this example, we've got all the things in green are the keys, like enabled, and then we've got the values in orange. But when you write, you can just use whatever colors you want. Keep in mind that for admin APIs, we have strict parameter value types. So what that means is if we say it's a Boolean, only true and false is allowed. Anything else is not allowed. So when you send a request to the server, you're going to get back a response. How do you know that this response is successful? Well, 200 so you're going to get back a status code. And if you get back 200, that means everything was successful. If you don't get back 200, then something could have gone wrong. And so 400, bad request. What does that mean? That means there's something wrong with your request format. It could be that it's an invalid JSON format, invalid parameter, missing parameter, any of those sorts of things. If you get a 477, that's a FileMaker error, which is something we made up. And when are you going to get this? Basically, the request was formatted correct. Server knows what it needs to do. It's trying to process, but it runs into an issue. If it runs into an issue, it's going to return back a HTTP status code of 477. Now, 500, internal server error. When would you get that? That basically means some exception happened in the server, and we don't know what to do with your request. So part of the response is the payload, which is the data you're going to get back. So in this example, I've got a post on the user login, which basically means I want to create a session. So the response you're going to get back, if it's successful, is a HTTP status code 200 with a payload that has the results parameter. And in this case, it's 0, which is a FileMaker error code. So this FileMaker error code means none. And you're also going to get back the data, in this case, the token. If something went wrong, you're going to get back an error, and you're going to get back an HTTP status code, and in this case, it's 401 for unauthorized. And you're also going to get back a payload with the result, which is the FileMaker error code. And this FileMaker error code 212 means invalid user account and/or password. So these FileMaker error codes, there are a few new ones, but most of them are the same ones that you know in Pro. Okay, let's put us all together. So this is the HTTP request, and that's what's being sent to the server. The first line is the request line. And you can see that I have patch, which is the HTTP method for my action. And then I got my URI endpoint, the resource I want to act on. You've got your protocol and your version. And then you've got a bunch of headers. And then these are basically the metadata describing that request. And right before your payload is the blank line. And then you have your payload, which is your data. So now what does the response look like? So the first line is the status line. And it's got the protocol, version, and then this 200 is your status code. So in this case, 200 means success. And then you have your header parameters, which is the metadata describing your response. And then right before your payload is your blank line. And then you have your data returned back. Now that we know all this structure, what does it really look like for the admin APIs? This API doc is going to be the most important guide that you have in FileMaker Server 17. And I'm going to show you what it looks like. So even though you can go to this link over here, I'm also going to show you how you get to it on your desktop. So you're going to go to the installation folder, in my case, library, FileMaker server, documentation, admin API documentation, and you're going to click on index.html. So this is what the API doc looks like. On the left side, you got all the admin APIs, and they're categorized. And in the main content, you have all the definitions. So you've got your authentication, your login, and you've got a description, and then you have this post that's in blue. So this post is your HTTP method, and then underneath you have your URI endpoint. And then underneath you've got your header parameters. So keep in mind that this is what we say is require, but of course when the request gets sent, it's going to come with a lot more headers than this. And that will be taken care of by whatever client you use. So now then you have your parameter, and this is basically what's going in your payload. And so in this parameter, I've got username and password, and you want to pay attention to this string type. And if you don't get the type right, you're going to be spending a lot of time getting errors and trying to figure out what's wrong, and then getting another error, and that's going to be painful. So then we have an example of what that payload looks like in JSON. And then you have your result. So in this case, we're showing you what the success result looks like. So most responses will always have a result with a FileMaker error code. And then in this case, we get the token back. So this token is how you're going to be able to perform your other admin APIs. So we've got our login, and then we have logout. So logout, that's going to be how you're going to invalidate your token. Then we also have client APIs, and then we have database server APIs. So this is the server config general API. And as you notice in the parameters, you got cache size, max files, max pro connections, max perform script on server. And basically, these are parameters that I'm sure a lot of you care about, and it can't be changed in the admin console, only through the command line in the admin API. So you can use these APIs to update them. And notice that in the update, it's using a patch. So what that means is you don't have to pass all of these values. You only pass the ones that you want to update. And notice also that the URI endpoint is the same for fetching and also editing. And that's because the URI endpoint tells you what are we going to do something on, and the HTTP method is the action you're going to really perform on it. So another one that you might care about is this require secure database flag. So by default, server installs with this flag on. And what that means is it's only going to host password-protected databases. So if some of your databases that don't have passwords aren't launching, it's possible because of this flag. Well, but I would say that the reason we have it on by default is for security. So you really want to make sure you know what you're doing before changing this value. So we also have database APIs. You can close, open, pause, resume your databases. And as I mentioned earlier, these are asynchronous operations. You also have list databases. So this databases is not purely about databases. It gives you a result with all the files, but it also tells you what clients you have. And from this, you're going to be able to also fetch the ID. So this ID over here is very important. If you want to perform operations specific to one client or one file, you're going to have to use this ID in the URI endpoint. So we also have APIs for PHP technology and the XML technology. But most important are these schedules APIs. And so we have APIs to perform, to create and edit, enable, disable, run for all types of schedules. And admin APIs is the only way you can create and update your message schedules and your verify schedules. So let's take a look at this. So this create backup schedule, in the back end, it's really only just one API, but in the front end, or in the API doc, we've listed it as several different APIs. And what it comes down to is this task type. So this task type for backup schedule is 1. But if you change it to some other value, then it's going to become a different type of schedule. And based on what type of schedule it is, then it's going to determine what the required fields are. And also, even though some of these say optional, they're only optional depending on what values you provided to the other fields. So take target, for example. If I say to all databases, then I don't need to indicate what folder. But if I say 3 for some databases under a subfolder, then I'm going to need to provide from target. Otherwise, server doesn't know what folder you want to back up. Another thing to keep in mind is that all these optional fields, if you don't provide a value for it, the default is going to be used. And that's going to edit. So as you notice in edit, it is using a put HTTP method. So as I explained earlier, put means replace everything I currently have with whatever I gave you in the request. So what that means is if some of these optionals, you don't fill it in, then it's going to replace it with the default and not what you had previously. Okay, so I think that's what I have for API doc. Now I'm going to show you how to execute these admin APIs in Postman. So Postman is a tool, a GUI tool to help you perform HTTP requests. And so here I've created a collection with authentication, databases, server configuration. And I've already created my APIs related to them. So I don't have to keep doing it every single time. And then over here, I've also created my own environment, local server, and you can create more. And what I did here is I have some variables in here for this server. And what I have is the URL prefix. Right now I'm using localhost, but you're not going to. And then I've got my token that I'm caching here. And so what this means is I can create different environments and set it to point to different servers. And then I can have my same APIs I wrote once and perform it on different servers. So let's take a look at authentication. So the login, as you see, it's the HTTP methods post. And here in Postman, it allows you to select other HTTP methods. And then over here, my URL, I have my prefix. I don't have to keep remembering that or typing that. And I've got user login. And then in this case, I'm authentication, so I don't have any of, well, I could use this, but I'm going to do it myself. And headers, so in headers, I have content type application JSON. And then body, I'm putting in the username and password. And it's admin, so very safe. Okay, I think that's all I need to perform my authentication. So as you can see, this is the response I got back, and Postman shows you what the status is, and it's 200, and we all know that's success by now, right? So now this is my body, and you can see the header has a lot of stuff coming in it, and it's even got show you what cookies, and then I've got my body, and then you can see that the result is 0, and we know that means no error, and then it even gave me a token. So as I mentioned earlier, you have 5 sessions. So let's see what happens when I perform this 5 times. So this was the first time, then this is the second time, third time, fourth time, fifth time, and the 6th time, I get an error message saying I have too many admin API sessions. So what am I going to do? So I can either leave and then go get some coffee and come back, and it's been 15 minutes and all my sessions probably got cleaned up. Or if you have this luxury, I can go to my terminal. And then if some of you are already familiar with this, I can stop my admin server and then start it back up. No, so you should go back to the architecture diagram, and you'll notice that the admin server is the Node.js process, which then talks to the database server. So the reason I wanted to provide that diagram is to also show you that the impact is to the admin console and to the admin API. But it doesn't impact your clients. And that's also something to keep in mind is I might just have disconnected someone using the admin console or admin APIs. Let's see. Okay, so let's try to log in again. And this time, I got a success. I got a result status 200, the result 0, and I got my token. And this time, I'm going to make sure that I cache it. Okay, so let's take a look at get databases. So get databases, I'm using the get HTTP method, and then I've got my URL with databases. And I could use, barrier token in this case, but I like control, so I'm putting my own header using authorization, barrier, and then my cache token. And then notice that Postman doesn't allow me to do anything with this body because, as I said, the get method is purely for retrieval. You shouldn't be modifying anything. It shouldn't have side effects. So Postman doesn't even allow me to do anything with body. And I think that's all I need to send my request. So now you can see, once again, everything's successful. And I get back this JSON, and the result is 0, and then we've got double results, I know. And we have files and then files. And then in my file, I can see that I've got FileMaker server sample, and the ID is 1, and I can see a lot of other information about it. I even see the decrypt hint here. And then I've got another file inventory with the ID of 2, and I've got no clients. So now I'm going to show you how to use the server config API. So the server config API, this is the fetch of it. So I use a get, and then I've got my URL, server config general. I got my header barrier token again, and once again, I can't do anything with body. I call send, and now I get back the cache size is 128, max files 125, max pro connections 250. So I want to go edit some of these values. So I go to this update API I already created using patch, and then I've got server config general, same URI endpoint. I got my header, so I've got two things here. And then in my body, I want to update the cache size to 64, max pro connections to 1. So I'm going to send this, and it looks like everything was successful, but I don't know what the new update is. So I'm going to go back to this get, and then call it again. And now my cache size is 64, and my max pro connections is now back to 1. So that is Postman. And now I'm going to show you scripting. And so my disclaimer is that I roll up these scripts in Python just for this demo. So you guys definitely should do whatever you need to, structure however you want for your purposes and for your solutions. So I'm going to go into my admin console just so you guys can see the results. And I'm going to be creating a backup schedule and then updating it. So here I have no backup schedules. And let's see. Now I'm going to go to my terminal. And then I think I saved this on the desktop, devcon scripts. OK, so there's my scripts. So I use Python, and I'm going to run the schedule script. And then my script takes in some parameters, like the host name, my username, password. And I even have error handling. And so it looks like I need an action, so I'm going to call create. And as you notice over here, I now have a schedule created through my Python script using admin APIs. So now in my code, I've hard-coded my data, and I'm doing that for the demo. But you guys can definitely think about, do you want to put it in a config file and read in that config file, or some other strategies for that. And so let's take a look at what I created here. So you can see that I have task type equal to 1, and here it's a backup type. And then I've named it my backup 1, and that's the schedule name. And I have target 2, which is all databases to be backed up. And I have frequency 3, meaning weekly. And then because I said weekly, I can now pass in the days of the week. And the days of the week is a string, 7-digit binary string that starts from Sunday and goes to Saturday. And so as you see, 1 means true, 0 means false. So 1 is Sunday, then I have Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So I have every Sunday and Thursday. So notice that I didn't pass in any values for max backups and verify and clone. And by default, it's set to 1, disabled, disabled. So now I'm going to update the schedule. So OK, so I'm going to update schedule 2, because that's the one I created. And then I'm going to do update. So now you notice the max backup is 3, verify and clone is now enabled. And so I also hard-coded that in my script. So you see that I only pass in max backups and clone and verify. But you also notice that nothing else has changed. It still is weekly, still every Sunday and Thursday, even though in my data, I didn't pass any of those values in. And I know earlier I keep talking about this put method replacing everything. So why is it that I didn't need to provide everything? So I took care of that inside my own Python script. So let's take a look at this. So basically, this is just the main function, and I bring in my definitions of all my admin APIs. I'm parsing the arguments and setting them to variables. And then I'm using that to construct my base URL, so I don't have to keep passing it in and constructing it everywhere. Then I've got my token, so I fetch my token using the username and password. And then once I get the token, then depending if I pass in the schedule ID or not, then based on the action, I will call different methods. So you can see this update one was, I hard-coded the inputs and then call my main function update, or not my main function, my helper function, passing the schedule ID and the data. And then same thing with the create. And then at the end, I invalidate my token. So my admin API, so Python provides me these useful modules. So it's got the request module and the JSON module. And this other stuff is just stuff I had to do to override the fact that I'm using localhost. So I've got my auth token here that takes in the username and password and constructs the JSON of it. And this JSON function then formats it properly. And this request, I can call a post on it, give it all the different parts that is important, get back a response, and in the response, I'm checking the status code. If it's 200, then I parse out the token. And if not, then I return an error. And similarly with the invalid auth token, and then I've got other methods to do other stuff. But let's take a look at the update backup schedule. So in order to simulate this patch, even though FileMaker server only supports put, I first get the schedule from the backend. So I call the admin API to get the schedule that currently exists, and then I massage it. And then I replace it with all the parameters that I passed in my data, and then I have to massage a lot of other stuff. So something to be aware of is the response of some of these admin APIs can't just be reused in the request. So take, for example, the start date. So the response of the schedules for start date has a space and colon in it. But the request takes in dashes. So I had to do some manipulation to replace that. And additionally, in the response, there's backup type has a hierarchical JSON structure, including like max backups, verify, clone, other stuff. And so I had to flatten it out for it to be proper for the request. And then also, in the response, I have false as a string when the request expects a Boolean value. And so I had to also deal with that. And then additionally, there are just some extraneous parameters that get returned in the response that I can't pass in the request, like days of the week details, last error, and last run, next run. And also, the response sends back all the parameters that might not be related to your backup type or all the whatever value you have set. Internally, it tracks every single parameter and gives it a invalid or default, even though it doesn't get used. But as part of the admin API request, we do validation in order to help you guys know whether that parameter is actually going to have any impact or not. So we reject all the parameters that aren't going to have an impact, versus in the back end, we're keeping track of all of it with default values that don't mean anything. So after I've massaged the schedule data, then I can call my request with a put HTTP method. And then everything will be fine from server, for the server. Okay, so that's schedules. And now I'm going to show another script. And this time I'm going to be needing some WebDirect clients. Okay. So I've got a Safari here, and I'm going to log into my inventory with Melody as, and then this is my Safari client. And then I have my Chrome client. And then I'm going to log into inventory. So I've got Safari client, Chrome client. I know this might be confusing, but I need more space. Okay, so I'm going to perform, let's see. Okay. So now I'm going to run my browser message script with localhost admin. Can't see. So then nothing happened to the Safari browser, but in the Chrome browser, it says, "Hello, Connor, please switch your browser to Safari." So how did I do that? Let's go back to the code. So I have this main function, and in my main function, I bring in my admin API definitions, and then I take in these arguments. I create my base URL, get my token, and after I got my token, I call my helper method, Safari message, and then I invalidate the token. And then in my Safari message, I'm basically fetching the client list. And I'm fetching the clients list, but I'm really fetching the database list with the client list. And then from that, if that was successful, then I loop through the clients, and then I check what the app type is, what the app version is, and if it's WebD and it's Chrome, then I parse out the account name, and then I call my send message admin API to display hello account name, please switch to browser Safari, and then I provide the client ID that I parsed out also. So let's see, send message. Okay. So the send message takes in a message client ID, it creates the data in the JSON, calls the request to post, and then uses this client ID in a URL, and then it formats the data to acceptable JSON, provides the barrier token, and then I get my response back, and if it's successful, then I display a message, otherwise nothing. Otherwise, I print an error message. And that's pretty much it. So even though these examples are really easy, what I want you guys to get out of it is the fact that admin APIs provides a lot of power and flexibility that I can do whatever logic I want on top of it, and then perform whatever actions I want. And this is something that I can't do in the admin console. So the flow of the execution is basically you install and set up your FileMaker server, but in terms of configurations that you have to do to make the admin API work, there really isn't any. You just need to make sure server's set up, you got valid custom certificates, and you have the admin server running, the DBS is running, and then when you're ready, then you can call an API, get your session token, and then use it to call whatever APIs you want. And when you're done, invalidate that token. So while preparing for this session, I wanted to show some integration. And I was thinking about how I wanted to do it, and then I stumbled upon Connor, who already did it. And I said, why not just have Connor come up and demo it for you? So please welcome Connor to the stage.
Hello everyone, my name is Connor Brock and I am a customer success engineer at FileMaker. And this is my 5th DevCon, so I'm happy to be here with you all. I got my start using FileMaker about 6 years ago, working frontline support out of our Kentucky office, so answering the phones. And then 4 years ago, made a huge life change to come to California from Kentucky. And so if you're thinking to yourself, his name sounds familiar or his voice sounds familiar, it may very well be that we've spoken over the phone or exchanged emails, or maybe I hung up on you, just kidding. But it's been great to be here to meet a lot of you in person that I previously just knew your voice and your name. So, and yeah, Melody asked me to present a file that I built. I built this demo file for Admin API and Data API, originally as a helper tool for myself and people in support, and hopefully even people who would call us to just have like a baseline of what works and as a troubleshooting tool. And that has sort of evolved into a full demo. So let me go ahead and get it opened up here. So this is built in FileMaker, and I think that's one of the great things about FileMaker is that you can build anything you want. And I am not a coder by any means, so it for me was definitely the perfect tool to try to calculate my requests, and wanted to just try to make it as easy as possible. So this first layout that I want to show you is a familiar looking admin console login page. I'm calling it sample console, with an important feature. I'll just blow it up. On the left here I have this list that represents multiple servers. And so this is a good example of why it would be important to build a file like this, is you can do things like manage multiple servers in a single interface. And so I actually have a cloud server and an on-premise server that I can both toggle between here. Back on the cloud, you'll notice that the settings are not really configurable. This is an example of one of the differences between the two. And it's also important to note that for this feature, I'm using something new to FileMaker 17, current found set portal. So that's pretty cool. And that also means that all of the records in this table each represent a different server address that I'm going to be sending my commands to. So let me go ahead and log in to the server. And it's doing a fetch, a grab of settings, existing settings. And this particular page is actually doing 4 different calls to fetch all the data that I want to display for you here. And as you might guess, I'm using a lot of script triggers and toggles that I can send back change requests to the server. And so if I wanted to be really picky with my cache size, I could bump it up one megabyte. And clicking out will script trigger, send that request off. And then for these other tabs, these buttons, I'm scripting to actually send off new fetch commands to make sure I'm looking at fresh data. And each time it's building out a list of child records to display what you see. And so the way that works is I'm taking the return JSON and looking through it and counting up how many unique items that I have that I want to display. And then based on that number and getting those item IDs, opening a hidden window, looping through creating new records. And those records, I've set up auto-enter calculations that is using our native JSON parsing functions that we introduced in 16 to zero in on just the nuggets of information that I want to display here, and storing those for future requests. And so let me switch over to another layout. This actually uses the same base table as the console that I've shown you, but this tool is actually the original conception that I had for this whole thing, to just have some easy way to calculate requests, and wanted to present the user of this file with input fields on the left and then on the right calculated syntax. And so no matter what kind of coding language you choose to use to send API requests to FileMaker, the problem still remains that you have to construct the request itself, and we follow very strict rules about that. And FileMaker can calculate those for you. You might notice that I chose to calculate both in curl and insert from URL. It's good to have both. If I click run command, it's going to use insert from URL to send that request and give me a response down here below. But the curl, I can just copy and paste into terminal and get the same result. And I can also tag onto the end -v for verbose. If I have any connection trouble, this is actually a pretty good troubleshooting tool to see more information about where the connection's breaking down. And so the way it's intended to work is you select your host, specify your server, and then I've got a drop-down list of commands. And as I mentioned before, there's both types, admin API and data API here. And so as I select various ones, there's conditional fields that show up that shows me exactly what's required in order to submit that request. So how does this all work under the hood? I've got a separate table that I call commands with 49 records, each record representing the various data API and admin API commands that we support. And you'll see here all the necessary ingredients to form that request. So there's the input URI, the method, and then most importantly, the headers and parameters key value pairs that Melody mentioned. So for the value half of those, I'm actually using FileMaker formulas here. So, and when you send a request, it's evaluating those formulas using the evaluate function. So the trick to this is to get a list of these key value pairs, split them apart from keys and values, evaluate only the values, and then mush them back together again in a block to form your request. Perhaps there's another way to do it, but that is the only way I actually could find to do this. And I have a recursive custom function that makes that happen. The neat thing about setting it up this way as opposed to any other way is that it becomes really scalable. As FileMaker 18 comes out and we add more functions and support, I'm expecting that this won't be too bad for me to go back in and just add more records. And as I build out these header and parameter definitions, I'm following the admin API guide pretty exactly to do that. The other advantage here is that I only have one script that sends the API request using insert from URL. And I can just pass parameters into the script for whatever command I want to use. And based on those formulas, it knows exactly which input fields to pull from. So this file is also going to be available in the session materials. And so I really hope you guys will check it out and get inspired to build your own files like this. And I had a lot of fun with it. And if you have any questions about it, I'm going to be at the Tech Support Central later today and also tomorrow until noon. So feel free to come bug me, ask me about this or anything else you like. And I'll be happy to bug Melody about it for you. So I'll welcome her back up. Thank you.
So something else that I wanted to show was in the processes, right? Can you guys see that? Okay. Anyways, if you're interested to know the admin server process, it's this FAC start.sh in your activity monitor. So if you want to monitor that, that's the process to monitor. facstart.sh. So here's a list of all the resources that you want to pay attention to. So because it's in trial, there might not be too much out there. But like I said, the API doc, that's your Bible. And the Cloud 17 Admin API Guide is something you want to use as a reference. As I said, there are slight differences there. And then there's the FileMaker error codes, and I put that there, and that's in the Pro help. And so most of the error codes should be in there. But anyways, I think what is going to happen is you're going to run your API, and then you're going to get back a bunch of errors, and you have to decipher what from the error code, the error message, what you did wrong. Because even though I said the API doc is the Bible, of course there could be mistakes in there, so I don't want you to, yeah. So I hope that we've shown you the power of admin APIs and the flexibility of it, and we think it's going to be a game changer. But be careful, be responsible with what you do with it, and I can't wait to see all the crazy things that you guys are going to be doing with this technology. So thank you, everybody. Enjoy DEF CON. I guess this will take questions. Okay. So I guess we have 4 minutes. We could take some questions if you guys have any. I think there's mics in the aisle.
Hi.
Hi.
Is it feasible with all the commands for the API that you have to actually configure an entire server from setup to your, like a config file would do?
Not in the trial version. There are still like web publishing engine settings that you can't do, ODBC, JDBC settings that you can't enable. So there are still a few missing admin APIs. But what we want to hear from you, what do you feel is missing for the admin APIs? So definitely let us know that. Thank you.
I have more of a general API question. I'm actually really excited about all the stuff I've seen here, but I've been having a really hard time using the insert from URL and I keep getting, the error 400s. You suck. And I'm just wondering, do you guys recommend using the JSON format elements to kind of, is that something that if you don't do that, you're running the risk of there should be a space between the colon and the quote or anything like that? Or is it more forgiving than that?
I think certainly the functions are there to avoid mistakes.
Okay.
So my recommendation would be to use them if you can.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just wasn't sure if that was something that was kind of a recommended practice or if that's just, okay.
I would say that it is a recommended practice, although it may be possible to replicate the same thing on your own.
Yeah.
You might as well use the functions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you, everybody, again, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you.